In the annals of Golden Age cinema, very few titles command the kind of cultural gravity that the Deepthroat franchise carries. What began in 1972 as a scrappy $22,000 production filmed inside a Miami hotel room would go on to become arguably the most commercially significant alternative picture ever made, spawning sequels, federal court cases, and genuine mainstream controversy across 2 full decades. But the third chapter of that franchise, the one featuring Golden Age icon Peter North, alongside one of the era's most explosively gifted new talents, arrived at the most pivotal crossroads in the history of the entire genre. Behind the cameras, an industry was dying. The theatrical era was over. The AIDS crisis had redrawn every boundary. And a young woman who had just won AVN's Best New Starlet Award mere months earlier was about to step into the most storied title in the history of her craft. What none of them knew, not Peter North, not the director, not the studio, was that this film would become one of the last authentic documents of an era quietly breathing its final breath. This is the forgotten sequel. This is its full, untold story. To truly understand Deepthroat 3, you have to understand what the name Deepthroat meant in the cultural imagination of America. When Gerard Damiano's original picture premiered at the World Theater in New York City on June 12, 1972, it set off a cultural earthquake. The film cost $22,500 to produce. Within 7 weeks, it had grossed over $1 million. Within 6 months, $3 million. It remained in Variety's top 10 highest-grossing films for 48 consecutive weeks. The names who admitted to watching it were not fringe figures. Martin Scorsese, Brian De Palma, Jack Nicholson, Frank Sinatra, Truman Capote. The title itself became a Watergate code word forever embedded in the lexicon of American political history. A United States senator used it as a nickname for a secret government informant. That is the level of cultural penetration we are talking about. The film launched what the New York Times would famously term porno chic, a brief, extraordinary window when explicit cinema crossed into mainstream conversation and genuine cultural debate. Suddenly, serious people were discussing these films seriously. Critics reviewed them, intellectuals debated them, and the box office numbers proved that ordinary Americans were watching them. Then came Part 2 in 1974. Directed by Joseph Sarno, it brought back original stars Linda Lovelace and Harry Reams, but made a decision so surprising that audiences never fully recovered from it. It was rated R. It was a softcore spy comedy. Audiences did not simply feel surprised. They felt cheated. By the time a third chapter was conceived in 1989, the landscape had changed beyond all recognition. The theatrical era was gone. VHS had taken over. Legal pressure had forced the industry underground, and the AIDS crisis had introduced a shadow that would never entirely lift. The question was no longer whether the Deepthroat name could still sell. The question was whether anyone had the craft, the ambition, and the courage to carry it forward with the honesty it deserved. 2 people believed they could. But the story of what happened on that San Francisco set and what became of both of them afterward is far more complicated and far more human than either of them could have imagined going in. Alden Joseph Brown was born on May 11, 1957 inches, Halifax, Nova Scotia, a long way from the sun-drenched boulevards of Los Angeles that would eventually define the entire arc of his professional life. Growing up in the Canadian Maritimes, Brown was, by all accounts, the last person you would have expected to become one of alternative cinema's most enduring figures. He studied theatrical arts at Maryville College in Tennessee, where he was a member of the Theater Honor Society Alpha Psi Omega. He played college football. He was simultaneously an athlete and an artist, a young man who arrived in California in 1982 carrying genuine creative ambitions and very little money to support them. The turning point came at a private party in Los Angeles, where an industry talent agent spotted Brown modeling athletic wear. Struck by his physique and his natural, unforced charisma, the agent handed him a business card. And in 1983, Alden Brown took his first steps into a world that would consume the next 2 decades of his life, reinventing himself completely under the stage name Peter North. His entry into the industry coincided with the last genuine years of the Golden Age, when films still had fully developed plots, real dialogue, proper rehearsals, and production budgets that reflected genuine creative ambition. North was perfectly built for that world. His discipline on set was noted and praised by virtually every director he worked with. His professionalism was consistent and unwavering, and his natural screen presence made him one of the most in-demand male performers of his entire generation. By 1989, North had appeared alongside virtually every major name in the industry. He was a known quantity, a trusted craftsman, and when the call came for Deepthroat 3, he was the natural choice, a performer who understood what the franchise had historically represented and who had the credibility and the commitment to honor it properly. Would bring him not just a new film, but the single most personally turbulent year of his entire career. And the reason for that turbulence had a name. That name was Tracy Lords. If Peter North represented the seasoned establishment of Golden Age cinema in 1989, then his co-star in Deepthroat 3 represented something entirely different. She was a comet. She arrived with blinding speed. She burned with extraordinary intensity, and she would be gone far too soon. Barbara Holder was born on July 14, 1963 inches, Westbrook, Maine, the daughter of a military man whose career moved the family from Portland, Maine to Germany, and eventually settled them in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was a restless, uprooted childhood that instilled in her an independence of spirit she would carry into everything she ever did. It was in Fort Lauderdale that a female friend first introduced a young Barbara to the world of exotic dancing. And it was through that world that she eventually crossed paths with her future mentor, the legendary Sharon Mitchell, who guided her toward the alternative film industry and helped her understand it from the inside. With clear eyes and full knowledge of what she was entering, she chose her professional name from the cover of a Steely Dan album. She called herself Aja. Her debut film, Wild in the Woods, was released in 1988. What happened in the 12 months that followed was nothing short of remarkable. In her very first year as a performer, Aja appeared in 3 films that would later be named among AVN's 500 best of all time. John Leslie's Mad Love, in which her performance was described by industry critics as notably surreal, won AVN Best Video of the Year. She herself won Best New Starlet in 1989. She was, from virtually her first frame on screen, a major and undeniable talent. Generally regarded as one of the most naturally gifted performers to have entered the Golden Age, Aja brought genuine emotional intensity to every role she accepted. Directors who worked with her consistently reached for one word to describe the experience: committed. And it was at this precise moment, barely 1 year into her career, standing at the absolute peak of her early momentum, with every door in the industry wide open before her, that she was cast as the lead in the most historically loaded title in the history of her genre. What happened next would define her legacy forever, and it will break your heart. Production on Deepthroat 3 began in San Francisco in 1989, and from the very first day on set, the director made a decision that set the film apart from most productions of its era. They would shoot on location. At a time when the industry had largely retreated into enclosed studio interiors, the production moved its cameras onto real streets, the Golden Gate Bridge, the waterfront, and the textured landscape of one of America's most cinematic cities. For a direct-to-VHS production, this was an unusually ambitious choice. The story follows the franchise's signature premise. Aja's character suffers from the same mysterious condition introduced in the original film, and the narrative unfolds through a series of dreamlike episodes as she lies anesthetized in hospital awaiting surgery. The structure created pacing challenges, but it also allowed space for performance. And performance was exactly what this cast delivered. Alongside Aja and Peter North were Tracy Adams, Megan Lee, and Mike Horner, experienced professionals working with clear creative intent. Those present later recalled that Aja carried the momentum of her Best New Starlet award onto the set with remarkable focus and commitment, earning the respect of even veteran performers like North himself. Today, the film holds a respectable 6.7 rating on IMDb, but numbers alone cannot explain what Deepthroat 3 truly represents: a final, sincere effort to preserve a legacy already beginning to disappear. By 1989, the world that had produced the original Deepthroat had largely disappeared. The theatrical era was over. The brief moment of mainstream attention, known as porno chic, had faded. Federal prosecutions had pushed studios underground, and the VHS revolution had transformed audiences from theatergoers into home viewers seeking convenience over craft. At the same time, the AIDS crisis permanently reshaped production practices across the industry. For Peter North, however, the year carried an even heavier personal weight. Only a few years earlier, the Tracy Lords scandal had sent shockwaves through the entire profession after it was revealed that one of its most recognized young performers had been underage during much of her career. The investigations that followed affected dozens of people across the industry, including North himself. The uncertainty of that moment cannot be overstated. Against this backdrop, Deepthroat 3 became something quietly significant, a film created by professionals who still believed in the traditions of an earlier era, even as that era was coming to an end. It was, in many ways, the last echo of the Golden Age. Peter North would go on to appear in more than 2,000 films across a career spanning decades, eventually entering both the AVN and XRCO Halls of Fame. In 2001, he launched his own production company, building a legacy that extended far beyond his years on screen. Aja's story followed a different path. She continued working into the early 90s, creating performances remembered for their emotional intensity and artistic presence, before later stepping behind the camera and eventually retiring from the industry. In 2006, she passed away, leaving behind a body of work that many still believe deserved wider recognition. Deepthroat 3 was not the most famous film either of them made, but as a document of a franchise at its final turning point and as a meeting point between two performers standing at very different stages of their journeys, it remains an important chapter in the history of Golden Age cinema. Some films do not need to be masterpieces to matter. They only need to be honest. Do you think Aja was robbed of the recognition she truly deserved? And do you believe Deepthroat 3 deserves its place in the canon of Golden Age cinema history, or has it been forgotten for a reason? Drop your honest take in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story meant something to you, please hit the like button. It is the single most powerful way to help this channel keep telling these forgotten histories. Subscribe to Retro Cinema, History, and Icon Biographies, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the films and the figures that shaped a vanished era. The next story we are telling is one that even the most devoted fans of the Golden Age have never fully heard. You will not want to miss it.